This is part 72 of jQuery tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss how to implement Autocomplete Textbox using jQuery and ASP.NET. Here is what we want to achieve. This database table tblStudents is going to contain some student data. Within an ASP.NET Web Forms application, we're going to have this student name text box. As we start to type the name of the student, we want this text box to suggest all the student names that are available. In this case, notice that we have started to type letter M, and this text box is suggesting all the student names that start with letter M. Now, instead of typing the student full name, we can actually select the name that we are interested in from these suggestions. So let's see how to implement this autocomplete feature in an ASP.NET Web Forms application using jQuery UI widget autocomplete. So the first step here is to create this database table, which I have already done, and here we've got the create table script, and this insert script is going to insert some test data. I've already executed the script, and at the moment within this students table we've got 10 rows. The next step is to create a stored procedure which is going to retrieve student name suggestions. So let's go ahead and create that stored procedure now. I'm going to call this spGetStudentNames. And this stored procedure is going to have a parameter. I'm going to call this term, and the data type of this is going to be nvarchar as begin end. So what do we want this stored procedure to do? We want to select name column from tblStudents table, where name like whatever is the input parameter that we are passing, and to that I'm going to append this wildcard percentage. So let's go ahead and execute the stored procedure. Okay, now for example, if we pass letter M to the stored procedure, then this stored procedure should return us all the student names that start with letter M. So what's going on here? So this M, whatever we type here, will be passed to this parameter. And look at this, here we are retrieving all the name column values from tblStudents table, where name like at term. So in this case, like M percentage. So give me all the student names that start with letter M. So for example, if I pass MA, then it should only return us all the names that start with MA. So we should get only 3 now. Okay, so we've got this stored procedure. Now let's go ahead and flip to Visual Studio. Here I have an ASP.NET Web Forms application. Within the web.config file, I have included a connection string to our sample DB database, which contain our tblStudents table. So the next step is to add a generic handler to this project. Okay, and I'm going to call, so within this add new item dialog box, select the generic handler, and I'm going to call this StudentHandler. So what is this handler going to do? It's going to retrieve the student data for us from the database table tblStudents. So within this ProcessRequest function within the StudentHandler class, so this inherits from IHttpHandler class, interface, and it has got this function ProcessRequest which we need to implement. So basically this function is going to retrieve the data from the database table and return those student suggestions. Okay, so we're going to write some ADO.NET code here. Let's bring in the ADO.NET namespaces. We need System.Configuration, we need System.Data, we need System.Data.SqlClient, and we also need System.Web.Script.Serialization, because we are going to serialize the data to a JSON format using this JavaScript serializer. Alright, so the first thing that we are going to do here within this ProcessRequest function is to create a variable of type string, and I'm going to call this term. And what is this going to do? It's going to make use of this context object. So this context object has got request parameter, and I'm going to request for a query string that has this name term. In a bit you'll understand where this query string is coming from. Now if we have a query string with that name, we want to use that value, store that value in this variable. Otherwise, if it is null for some reason, then store empty string in this variable. In a bit you'll understand how we are going to use this variable. Alright, so the next step is to create a string variable, and I'm going to call the CS connection string, and we are going to read the connection string from web.config file using the configuration manager class. The name of the connection string is DBCS, and we want the connection string value. Okay, and using that connection string, I'm going to create a SQL connection object. Let's call this con, and we are going to use the connection string that we have just read from web.config file. Okay, the next thing that we are going to do is create a SQL command object, and using this SQL command object, we are actually going to execute this stored procedure that we have created, spGetStudentNames. And we are going to execute this command object using this SQL connection object. Since this command object is executing a stored procedure, we have to tell that to the command object using the command type property. And this stored procedure also has got a parameter, an input parameter. So we need to create that and associate it with the command object. So command object dot parameters dot add. And what do we want to add? We want to add a new SQL parameter object. So let me go ahead and create that. Create a new SQL parameter object. And let's populate the two required properties, the name of the parameter. So parameter name. What is the name of the parameter? We called it @term. So let's copy that and specify it here. And where is the value going to come for this? This is going to come from this variable. Okay, so let's pass that. So we have created the parameter, associated it with the command object. Now let's go ahead and open the connection, and let's execute the command. So command dot execute reader, and whatever result we get, let's store that in SQL data reader object. Let's call it RDR, while RDR.read. So while we are looping through each row, what do we want to do? We want to create a list of student names. So I'm going to create here a list variable. So list of string. Let's call this list student names equals new list of string. So while we are looping through each row, that this is command.execute reader. Okay, so we are going to get the reader object as we are looping through each row. Then what we want to do, we want to add to the student names list the name of the student. So RDR, and this is going to contain name column. So retrieve the name column value and add it to the list. Okay. So by the time this code finishes, we have all the student names added to that list. Okay. Now what do we want to do? We want to create an instance of JavaScript serializer class. And this object has got serialize function, and we are going to serialize the list of student names to JSON format. And whatever we have serialized, we want to write that to the response stream. So I'm going to again use this context parameter that's coming into this function. So context.response.write, we want to write the JSON object, JSON string. Okay, so we have our handler function which is going to talk to the database and retrieve the data. Okay, so let's go ahead and quickly test our student handler. Okay, so I'm going to run this, and let's navigate to StudentHandler.ashx. So look at this. In this case, we don't have the term query string, right? We are not passing the term query string to this handler, right? As a result, what happens? We are passing an empty string. So when we pass an empty string, that empty string gets passed to this stored procedure, spGetStudentNames. And what happens when we pass an empty string? It's going to return us all the student names from the database. Okay, and that's what we are getting here. Now, for example, if we pass term query string, and if I pass letter M is the value for that query string, look at that. Now we only get student names that start with letter M. If I pass, for example, MAR, look at that, names that start with MAR. Alright, so our handler is working as expected. Now let's go ahead and add a web form to our project. and let's name it webform1.aspx. And here let's actually include this literal text student name, and I'm going to include an ASP.NET text box here. Let's give it an ID. Let's call it txt name. So this is going to be our name text box into which we type the student name. And the important thing here is within our head section, we have to, the first thing that we need to do is include this script file. This is our jQuery file, jQuery script file. Now in addition to that, we need the jQuery UI and JavaScript files. So we want to use the jQuery autocomplete widget. So now in order to get that, navigate to jQueryui.com website, and here on this website you can actually find all the jQuery UI widgets. So here we have accordion, autocomplete, button, date picker, etc. Okay, so we're going to see how this autocomplete widget is going to work. We're going to use this in an ASP.NET Web Forms application. So now on this website, when you actually click on this download button, it will take you to their download page. And at the moment, notice this, we've got this checkbox toggle all. So all the UI widgets, all of them are selected. Okay, now for some reason within your production application, if you want to just use the autocomplete widget, then there is no reason why you want to download the source code, CSS and images of all the widgets, right? So in that case, what you can do is customize this download. So you can uncheck this and then check only the widgets and components that you need. So in this case, if we just need autocomplete, so I can select that, and all the dependencies will be automatically checked for us. And then once you click download, only the source code, that is the jQuery code, CSS and images required for that component will be downloaded. In case if you want all of them, check this box toggle all, so it's going to select all of them. And once we click this download all, it's going to download the required files. I've already done this and downloaded the zip file. Once you extract, within the folder you will have several JS, CSS and HTML files and images folder as well. So within the images folder, we've got all the images that the widgets require, and here we have the minified and non-minified versions of CSS and JavaScript files. If it's a production app, then probably use your minified versions because they are smaller in size, so they are optimized. If it's for your development purpose, then use the non-minified versions for easy debugging. So within my project, here the ASP.NET Web Forms application, we're going to implement the autocomplete widget, right? So all you need here is three things. So you need, the jQuery UI JavaScript file, jQuery UI CSS file, and the images. Okay, so I've already done this, so I've copied them and pasted into our ASP.NET Web Forms application. So we have the jQuery UI, CSS file, and the jQuery UI JS file, and I also have the images folder. Within our webform1.aspx, at the moment we only have referenced the jQuery file, script file. In addition to that, we also need the jQuery UI JS file. We need the jQuery UI CSS file. So those are the three things we need. And let's include another script section here. So script type equals text/JavaScript and $document.ready. Okay, so we want to use autocomplete feature. So we want to use that autocomplete feature with this text box txt name. That's the ID. So let's find this text box with that ID. So find the text box by ID, and the ID that we are looking for is txt name. And let's copy that. And look at this. On this, I can actually call autocomplete. So that's a function that we are calling. And look at what this function expects. It expects some options to be passed. Okay. And if you want to see what those options are, you also have the jQuery UI documentation available. So if you click on API documentation, it will take you to another page where you can find the documentation of all these UI widgets. Okay. So if you want to find, for example, autocomplete, you can search for that. So autocomplete widget, and look at this. Here are all the options that you can use, and look at the source option. So basically you'll have to set the source option. So this is going to contain the suggestions that we want to display within that name text box in this case. Okay, so we'll talk about the source in detail in a later video session. For now, we are going to set the source option, and we are going to set that using a JavaScript object. So I'm going to set source to our handler. Okay, StudentHandler.ashx. So the name of the handler in this case is StudentHandler.ashx. So this is all the code that it requires. So what is this handler going to do? This is going to return us the student name suggestion. So what is going to happen now? Let's go ahead and run this. So here, look at this. As I type letter M, look at that, we get all the suggestions that start with letter M. Similarly, for example, when I type letter A, look at that, and as I continue to type, look at that, whatever suggestions that match the characters, those are displayed. For example, if we type letter R, look at that, we get that list. So what's happening here? Now, when I type letter R, for example, here, what's going to happen is this autocomplete, this is going to call this StudentHandler.ashx, and it's going to pass that letter that we have typed, in this case R, to this handler using a query string. So what it's going to do is call the student handler and then append a query string. So StudentHandler.ashx question mark term equals whatever we type into the text box. In the text box we have typed letter R, so that R will be passed using that query string to the handler. And what are we doing with that query string within this handler? We're actually reading that query string value and we are passing that to the stored procedure. Stored procedure is executed, and whatever the names that match, that start with that letter, are returned back, and then those are displayed as the suggestions within this text box. So here is the handler code. Here is the web form, HTML and jQuery code. Thank you for listening and have a great day.